I'm Walter Cronkite. This is the story of a war that shook the foundations of France, then ended her Asian empire. It is a story whose climactic moment came in an obscure jungle outpost named Dien Bien Phu. This is our story, End of an Empire, as the Prudential Insurance Company of America presents the 20th Century. August 1945. After 80 years of colonial rule and 4 years of Japanese occupation, a new surge for independence sweeps French Indochina. As French troops return to Hanoi and to Saigon, symbol of France's Eastern Empire, European citizens welcome them. But many Vietnamese support a new nationalist government that claims most of Indochina. At the head of it, a hero of wartime resistance, Ho Chi Minh. At 55, Ho has become a legend. A communist, although many of his followers are not, Ho, trained in Moscow, educated in Paris, follows a pure nationalist line. He tells the French, "We want to govern ourselves, but we need your engineers and your capital." In March 1946, France recognizes Ho's Republic of Vietnam. Bao Dai, the Emperor of Annam, has abdicated to become Ho's political advisor. A pre-war French puppet, then a Japanese one, Bao Dai's basic French ties will see him again allied with France against Ho. Ho arrives in Paris to plead for complete independence, but his mission is doomed to failure. While he is away, French colonialists are creating a puppet regime in Saigon, and communist extremists are terrorizing Hanoi. Ho begs French liberals for support. "You will not regret it," he says. He grants an exclusive interview to CBS News correspondent David Schoenbrun.
Ho came into the room that night wearing the uniform that had been made popular by Stalin, by Chiang Kai-shek. Just a simple khaki, high-collared uniform, no decorations, no insignia of any kind. And I said to him, "President Ho, you keep talking about war. Is there going to be war between your people and the French?" And to my astonishment, this president, in office in time of peace, speaking in Paris, his allied country, replied, "Yes, there will be war. There's no way out. The French do not really recognize our independence. It's all a masquerade. We are not really independent. We mean to be, and there will be war." I looked at him and said, "President Ho, how can you possibly fight war against the modern French army? You have nothing. You've just told me what a poor country you are. You don't even have a bank, let alone an army and guns and modern weapons. The French have planes, tanks, napalm. How can you fight the French?" And he said, "Oh, we have a lot of things that can match the French weapons. Tanks are no good in swamps, and we have swamps in which the French tanks will sink. And we have another secret weapon. It's nationalism. And don't think that a small ragged band cannot fight against a modern army. It will be a war between an elephant and a tiger. If the tiger ever stands still, the elephant will crush him and pierce him with his mighty tusks. But the tiger of Indochina is not going to stand still. We're going to hide in our jungles by day and steal out by night. And the tiger will jump on the back of the elephant and tear huge chunks out of his flesh and then jump back into the jungle. And after a while, the mighty elephant will bleed to death." That was the prediction of Ho Chi Minh on September 11th, 1946.
November 20th, 1946, the harbor of Haiphong. The guns of a French cruiser fire on the town as colonial extremists decide to teach the Vietnamese a lesson. 3 days later, 6,000 natives have been killed in a massive French attack. It is the beginning of a war that will last more than 7 years. Ho Chi Minh tries to stem the violence. He checks his communist army leaders. When Leon Blum, a socialist, becomes premier of France, Ho sends him a desperate cable urging peace. The French censor in Hanoi delays the message. It arrives too late. On December 19th, fighting starts in Hanoi. After a brief battle, the Vietnamese are driven out. French retaliation against the native population ends all hope of peace. Ho's government has fled to the jungle. It is no new experience for this guerrilla veteran who fought the Japanese from these hills, sometimes with secret American OSS help. In this mountain hideout, the guerrillas, who call themselves the Viet Minh, mapped the long war against France. Theirs is a people's army. As Ho has predicted, it is now rapidly becoming a communist army. Its tactics, as well as its indoctrination, are borrowed from Mao Zedong's Chinese Communist Handbook. Weapons are often crude and homemade. Instruction is brief, but to the point. The Viet Minh works hard to win popular support in accordance with the time-proved communist formula. If not by conviction, then by coercion. There is no denying the popularity of Ho Chi Minh himself. To the simple peasants, he is their leader and benefactor, and they revere him. Uncle Ho, they call him. This is a clandestine war of ambush. Weapons are more valuable than gold. They must be used sparingly and hidden carefully in the ground and in swamps. Mines and sometimes bamboo spikes soaked in poison are planted. The men and women of the Viet Minh wait for a French convoy. The Viet Minh captures fresh weapons. Small arms, for the moment, are most valuable. The French use mine detectors and do their best to discover where the Viet Minh hides its guns and grenades. Many are found, but not enough to stop the growing guerrilla army. Sabotage of railroads and communications spreads throughout the countryside. The French decide to repeat their European history, to fight a stationary war, a war of forts, a Maginot Line war. But in the Indochina jungle, no such line is possible. Barbed wire and concrete are spread far apart in an effort to hold a few fixed positions. The French use their few outmoded planes to carry paratroopers into Viet Minh territory, where roads are scarce and dangerous. They hope to flush out the elusive enemy in a series of lightning raids. But on the ground, the going is slow and muddy. Only a few guerrillas are spotted. Some natives have been indoctrinated by communist cadres to believe zealously in the Viet Minh cause. Many others are only part-time guerrillas whose real desire is to be left alone in their villages. In this type of war, the hunters quickly become the hunted. It is a brutal seesaw battle against hidden elements. Prisoners and occasional refugees are an important source of information. But the Viet Minh's jungle grapevine is often more efficient than French intelligence. The French suffer heavy casualties as the guerrilla war continues. Until 1950, it remains primarily a local conflict. But as the communists strengthen their hold on the nationalist movement and begin to bolster their forces with aid and advisors from neighboring Red China, it will become a key part of the world's struggle between communism and the Western democracies. As the war in Indochina mounts in intensity, the French plead for increased American aid and get it. In 1950, it comes to about $100 million. 4 years later, it will be nearly 4 times that much. In all, the United States pours nearly $4 billion worth of military, financial, and economic assistance into Indochina in an effort to avoid a French and a free world defeat. Some of the aid, such as heavy trucks and cement for roads, is of questionable value. It is hoped that this aid will enable the French to stem the communist tide. General Jean de Lettre de Tassigny, a brilliant officer, arrives to rebuild the morale of the dispirited colonial army. In addition to Vietnamese recruits, de Lettre's force of 170,000 includes tough professional soldiers from the Foreign Legion and volunteers from all parts of the French Empire. De Lettre employs American aircraft on a massive scale and kills 6,000 Viet Minh in a pitched battle east of Hanoi. In the face of growing French air power, the Viet Minh soon becomes expert at camouflage. Military aid from Red China has begun to reach the Viet Minh. To increase the flow of supplies, better roads are needed. Men and women work with their hands. Hands are not as good as bulldozers, but enough of them do the job. General Raoul Salan, later to head the secret army in Algeria, succeeds the ailing General de Lettre. Bao Dai is back as chief of a French-sponsored government in Saigon. But the French, still unwilling to grant the Vietnamese real independence, lack popular support. At his northern headquarters, General Vo Nguyen Yap, the tough commander of the Viet Minh Army, prepares his strategy. Yap now figures he has enough strength for a frontal assault, but he must move carefully. He plans to draw the French into a trap. In Saigon, the new National Assembly meets. Its members and Bao Dai's cabinet are mostly French-weaned property owners and professional men with little political experience. There are no Northerners represented among the delegates and no figure like Ho Chi Minh to command respect and provide strong, united leadership. By the fall of 1953, the French have 500,000 men in Indochina, a 2-to-1 numerical superiority over the Viet Minh. But they're still losing heavily in jungle combat. The stage is set for a showdown. It comes when the French launch an airborne attack against an obscure northern village named Dien Bien Phu. Its chief military asset is an airstrip built by the Japanese in World War II. In a shallow valley near the Laotian border, Dien Bien Phu has been chosen as an objective for both political and military reasons. Viet Minh units have begun to move west across the border into neighboring Laos. Their route takes them along one of the few roads linking the two countries, a road that passes through Dien Bien Phu. General Henri Navarre, who has replaced Salan as French military commander, feels that creating an impregnable strong point at Dien Bien Phu will stall the Red Drive into Laos. The entire operation is to be supplied from the air. To French military commanders who cling to their concept of defensive forts, Dien Bien Phu will become the greatest fort of all. 3,000 tons of barbed wire are strung, triple the normal quota for such a defensive position. Units are provided with 9 days of rations, 8 days of ammunition, and such special aids to modern warfare as flamethrowers and nighttime infrared sights called sniper scopes. The Dien Bien Phu garrison is a polyglot force of 12,000 foreign legionnaires, Moroccans, Algerians, and Vietnamese, commanded by a colorful cavalry colonel named Christian de Castres. With all he has in men and supplies, says General Navarre, there is a 100% chance of crushing the Viet Minh. In a mountain factory using a primitive water wheel for motive power, the Viet Minh works to increase its arsenal. Some weapons have been captured intact, some must be repaired, others are manufactured from scratch with homemade equipment. The Viet Minh workers include conscripts, but many are indoctrinated and zealous partisans of the communist cause. The bulk of Viet Minh supplies now comes from communist China. They're carried across the border 200 miles northeast by a force of 75,000 coolies. At Dien Bien Phu, the job of preparing the unique fortress is almost complete. Despite its modern equipment, there's something medieval about it, something anachronistic. The big planes pour in on the refurbished Japanese airstrip, bringing flamethrowers, mortars, artillery, and even tanks. But what is out of focus is the thinking behind it all. CBS News correspondent David Schomburn was there.
We stood in Dien Bien Phu. I'll never forget it. It was a little muddy field, and it was shaped something like this. It was in the hollow of my palm here, and all around us were mountain crests, high ridges. The French were located down here in the bowl. They called it La Cuvette, which was a bowl. And I remember some of the correspondents saying to the French general at the time, "But General, what happens if the enemy ever gets up onto the ridge? He's going to be shooting fish in a barrel." And the general looked at that and said, "Oh, yes, but you see, these Vietnamese, these Annamites, they're not very good with artillery like we Europeans are. They don't have any heavy stuff, and we think it's unlikely that the Chinese will give them heavy stuff." That was the gamble they took. It was unlikely that the Chinese would furnish the Viet Minh communists, whom the Chinese were backing.
The general has made a tragic miscalculation. Artillery, including American guns captured by the Chinese Reds, is furnished the Viet Minh in quantity. Painfully pushed and pulled up mountain trails, these guns will provide the key to victory. The French will be thoroughly outgunned. The Viet Minh has maneuvered its artillery into position as adroitly as if it were dealing with light machine guns. Soldiers work side by side with coolies to complete the buildup. The death knell of colonialism in Asia will be sounded in the terrible battle about to take place at Dien Bien Phu. Yap surrounds the French with 4 divisions. March 13th, 1954. The French are surprised, psychologically and physically stunned. Within hours, the Viet Minh captures the first of 8 strong points de Castro has romantically named for former girlfriends. The French reply with their own artillery, but it is not nearly so effective. French planes drop napalm bombs, liquid fire. But it is apparent that Dien Bien Phu needs reinforcements. Reports David Schomburn.
I remember watching French and Vietnamese paratroopers volunteering to jump into Dien Bien Phu, even in the last days of the war when they knew that it was suicide. They had more volunteers than they had planes to carry them. Rarely in history can one witness such a magnificent and totally absurd sacrifice of human life and noble courage as at Dien Bien Phu.
More than ever now, the French depend on their planes, but heavy Viet Minh anti-aircraft fire, also unexpected, cripples French air support. The Dien Bien Phu airstrip is riddled with shells. Planes can no longer land there. Helicopters must be brought in to evacuate the wounded. They are carried to the airfield from a nearby field hospital and loaded, often under fire. French nurses perform heroically. One of them, Geneviève de Galard, will gain undying fame in her country as the Angel of Dien Bien Phu. In France, the battle is being called the Verdun of Vietnam. The French have trouble spotting the Viet Minh guns cleverly hidden in the hills. As the unequal duel continues and communist fire predominates, the French artillery commander is driven to suicide. Tanks cannot stop the Viet Minh from closing in through a maze of trenches. Enemy shock troops are dug in as close as 10 yards from the French lines. Despite heavy losses, they overrun the French positions one by one. The siege of Dien Bien Phu lasts 55 days. On May 7th, the Viet Minh starts its final assault. At French military headquarters in Hanoi, David Schulmer.
I was in the dugout at Hanoi at Supreme Headquarters with General René Cagny, who was calling Dien Bien Phu. Every one of the little citadel positions had been captured by then. The radio communications were growing fainter, and we could hear the noise of communist guns. We could even hear the screaming of the wounded on that radio communication, until finally we heard the voice of the caster saying, "My general, they're coming in now. All is over. I must cut off." The radio went dead. We heard no more from Dien Bien Phu. It was the end of the garrison. It was the end of the French adventure in Indochina. It was indeed the end of the French Empire.
French captives, almost 10,000, are subjected to brainwashing in a Viet Minh prison camp. Colonel de Castres, now a general in defeat, is one of them. Communist political officers hand down the line as the prisoners listen abjectly. 1,500 of their comrades at Dien Bien Phu are dead, and 4,000 have been wounded. More will die in Viet Minh captivity. The victory at Dien Bien Phu gives the Viet Minh bargaining power at a peace conference in Geneva. They get all of Vietnam north of the 17th parallel, with Hanoi their capital. French troops leave Hanoi forever, but many of them are headed for another long, bloody war in Algeria. As the last French soldiers cross the bridge leading from Hanoi, Viet Minh guards take over. Communism has won a far-reaching victory in Asia. Refugees, there will ultimately be 1 million of them, head for the south below the line drawn at Geneva. These are the Vietnamese who do not choose to live under communism. The old and the young, they stream along the roads and trails on foot. Some go by sea in small boats, while others come down the coast to Saigon by ship. Today, many of these refugees are leaders in the continuing fight to preserve their freedom by saving South Vietnam from communism, a strikingly similar kind of war in which the United States is deeply committed. The story of next week's episode in a moment. And now a message from your host, the Prudential Insurance Company of America. Next week at this time, the Prudential will present a story of espionage never before told on television, of the most massive spying effort ever directed against a single country, West Germany. These are actual Red spies at work, filmed secretly by West German security forces. Next week, this story. This is Walter Cronkite reporting for the 20th Century.